That's okay. I've done small congregations before. James Viola Blake wrote an affirmation for the Unitarian Church of Evanston, Illinois. 100 years later, the choir director, music director at First Unitarian Church, Salt Lake City, which was my sponsoring congregation, set that affirmation to music. And you may recognize the words. And David Van Alstyne's piece goes like this. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another, help one another, help one another, one another. So, 100 years after this piece was written, it was still evolving and transforming. Never in anybody's bylaws.
Thank you, and good morning. Welcome to the First Unitarian Church of Cincinnati, whether you're joining us virtually or in person on this beautiful snowy Sunday, or whether you're watching the recording, maybe warm in a future moment in time. My name is Allison Irwin. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm grateful to be here with you today as your worship associate. Occupying land that was once the sacred space of the Adena, Hopewell, Miamia, and Shawandasi people, we are a community committed to social justice and to supporting the spiritual and ethical paths of our members. Our community is growing and changing in many ways. We are striving to be as much of a welcoming community as we can be, for we know that we can only grow to become better people, by recognizing that we need each other. That is why we provide, for example, gender-neutral bathrooms here at the church, space for our children to be part of the community when they are here. Today they're at home, they're warm, and hopefully saying hi by a wave. We provide hearing assistance devices, and we encourage you wherever you are to be as comfortable as possible during worship. This is what it means for us to build a beloved community where everyone matters. We know we're a work in progress and that we will make many mistakes along this journey before we get it right. But the point is that we are striving to do better because we want others to join us on this aspirational journey. If you would like to know more about our Unitarian Universalist Church, please contact us at member-care@firstuu.com. And now we will light our chalice. Our chalice reading this morning comes from Reverend Sarah Asher. May the light from this flame be a beacon of our faith in the days that grow dark and dreary. May the light from this flame be warmth to our spirits during nights of restless search. May the light from this flame be a celebration of the truth, meaning, and joy that we find within these walls and in our dreams. Our first hymn today is number 298 in your gray hymnal. The lyrics will also appear on the screen. Wake now our senses. I will step back from the microphone. None of you want me leading us in the song, but I will quietly sing from the back as I often do. Number 298, Wake Now Our Senses. We don't have the lyrics on the screen. Give us 1 second to figure out the plan then. Let's see. Shall we just play the music here and sing? Yeah, so we'll just sing it here. If you know at home and want to follow along, great. Otherwise, listen to the congregation, as it were. And now is the time during service when we traditionally turn and greet our neighbor. Some of you may have a neighbor you're watching with, some of you may not. If you are watching on YouTube, I'd invite you to just type a comment, hello, whatever you may want to share. There's community that we can make even when we're not together. Those of you here in person, of course, can turn and greet each other. And before we do that, I forgot to share one important announcement. Our congregational meeting was scheduled to follow this service, and given the weather, it will be postponed. So look for your email. The details for when it will be rescheduled will be shared by email, but we wanted to make sure to share that. Say hello on YouTube, say hello in person. Cheers with your cup of coffee wherever you may be. It's a little bit faster when there are 12 of us here. No? Welcome to everyone. And now we'll transition to our story for all ages. Reverend McCarty.
Well, it's actually an exercise for all ages this morning. And I'm going to have to ask for help since the kids aren't here today. I'll have to ask for help from children of all ages. I'll need 4 or 5 folks. And what this exercise is, what does Unitarian Universalism sound like? Every religion has distinctive sounds, particularly when they're making things happen and using sound-making devices. For example, and this church has one of these. I brought a big old Tibetan singing bowl, and there's lots of cool things you can do with this guy. You can dong it. You can make it sing. So in Tibetan Buddhist centers, and also a lot of Zen centers, and certainly UU churches around the world, you'll hear a singing bowl. So that's the sound of those religions. Does anybody want to try this thing? Don't be shy. Come on up and give me a hand here. Not that kind, this kind. Okay. See what you can do with that thing. And the trick is to do just what you're doing. Hold it at the bottom. Not singing loud, but it's singing. Okay. Now, if you study Zen in Korea, you'll see these things. Let me go a different way. A lot of Japanese Zen centers in the U.S. and also in Japan, of course, use a small, like a T-bell like this. And of course, churches like this one and Christian churches in the U.S. use a great big clapper bell like this. But certainly they start and end their sitting sessions with a little T-bell like this guy. I think we have a big bell here that we ring sometimes. So that would be the sound to a certain extent of American Protestant churches, Catholic churches, and also Japanese Zen centers. So who wants to? Okay, all right. They also use, when they chant, Zen centers and also Tibetan Buddhist centers around the world use one of these guys. This is a little bitty one. It's called a moktok, and it's to keep the rhythm. Okay, that's a moktok. Rhythm? All right. There you go. Okay. Also, come on over here, Ramona. Oh, okay. Got to get everybody in the camera here. You got this. Now, if you're studying Zen in Korea, when they start and finish their sitting sessions, they don't use the tea bell. They use one of these things, and this is called a chukpi. And so when you start the sitting session, you do this. And when you finish the sitting session, you do this. The idea is the same as the bell, that sound calls you into the moment, which of course is what Zen is all about. The moment is all we have. So who has tough hands and wants to try using this guy? Don't be shy. Terrific. Stay on camera. Yeah, you don't have to do it as hard as it looks like it's being done. Okay. And finally, again, Tibetan Buddhism. These get popular in Unitarian Universalism as well. Tibetan hand chimes. Very brilliant, clear sound. And again, kind of the same principle. Really with all of these is they call you into the moment when something special is going to happen. Okay. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Got to be a little more coordinated than I am. There we go. Okay, who's coordinated and wants to try try these guys? Who said the draft was done? Okay, let's have you over here also. Okay, now, so the question we're answering this morning is, what does Unitarian Universalism sound like? Everybody use your noisemakers all at once. That's the sound of Unitarian Universalism. And thank you, and if you were kids, we'd sing you out to your classes, but instead we'll just sit down and go on. Thank you, thank you. Luckily, they're semi-non-breakable.
This is the time when we think about the joys and sorrows in our hearts. Normally, we would have a bowl of water before me, and today I will invite us to imagine water and imagine stones. The water typically represents the love of our community, and the stones we drop in the water to either soften our sorrow or amplify our joy. All the individual joys and sorrows come together in a single bowl of water so that they can be symbolically shared and borne by our community. We'll take a minute or so for personal reflection on any joy or sorrow in your heart. If visualization serves your needs, imagine dropping it in the communal bowl, and Jira will play us some music, and then I will come back. We also drop 3 more stones in the water. One for all the joys and sorrows outside our walls that go unmentioned. A second for the joys and sorrows that go unspoken, but that we closely guard in our hearts. And one for the brokenness in our world, as we search for ways to be agents of wholeness and change by placing ourselves in that breach. As we prepare for our offering today, we want to remind you that our Share the Plate for January is the Jubilee Fund created by Faith Choice Ohio. Faith Choice Ohio elevates the moral power of faith communities to expand abortion access and to advance reproductive health, rights, and justice. Giving to First Church is easy. You can text the word GIVE to 513-717-7373. If you have access to our Breeze member system, you can click Give Now, or you can give online at firstuu.com. Or you can mail your check to 536 Linton Street, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45219. If you'd like to give to Faith Choice Ohio, please write Faith Choice Ohio in the memo line of your check. And if this is your first time visiting us, please let the virtual plate pass you by. Your presence is gift enough. Today are given by Amber Seeley Marks in honor of Stephen Marks' birthday. Happy birthday, Stephen.
I had a cold for 2 weeks a little while back, and I've been getting over it for three weeks. So if I pause to use a Kleenex or something, hang in there with me. The topic this morning is beloved community, and I will begin with a definition. Beloved community is what happens when people of diverse racial, ethnic, educational, class, abilities, and or gender identities come together in an interdependent relationship of love, justice, respect, mutual respect, and care. So, widely diverse people coming together in a relationship of love, justice, mutual respect, and care. Humans being humans, that can be complicated. People from different backgrounds and different experiences see and feel things differently. We may love and care for someone very different from ourselves, but that alone does not create justice or mutual respect. 20 years ago, right after I started my ministry in Columbus, Indiana, Columbus East High School had a big controversy over doing a play, To Kill a Mockingbird, as their school play. And they were into rehearsals when parents of black cast members objected, they said, to what some people call the N-bomb in the script. The play's publisher would not allow the script to be changed. The Columbus chapter of the NAACP stepped in, and the performance wound up being canceled. By that time, pretty much everyone involved was angry at everyone else involved, and not without justification. It was a very complex and unfortunate situation. A few years later, I preached a sermon about the film version of To Kill a Mockingbird. It is, on one level, a fine and thoughtful movie, but it is also a perfect example of how a movie or a play or a person can be anti-racist as an ideal while reinforcing structural racism in practice. Author Harper Lee's book, the play, and also the movie did call attention to racial injustice in the Deep South. At the same time, none of them portrayed the story's black characters as real human beings. As film critic Roger Ebert put it, the black characters are no more than props in a story about a brave white liberal. Close quote. In the movie's climactic courtroom scene, black handyman Tom Robinson has been unjustly accused of assaulting a white woman. Atticus Finch, the noble white lawyer in the story, cross-examines the woman and proves beyond a doubt that Tom Robinson is innocent. He could not have committed the crime, but the all-white jury convict him anyway. Now here's the problem. Despite this terrible injustice, there is no outrage from Tom Robinson's black friends and family sitting in the courtroom's balcony. There's not even grief. Instead, they all stand in silent respect to honor the white lawyer, Atticus Finch. Later, when a prison guard shoots and kills Tom Robinson, Atticus Finch meekly accepts that getting killed was Tom Robinson's own fault. And with the murder of George Floyd, I think we can all see the problem with that plot device. Years later, Harper Lee's estate posthumously published an earlier version of To Kill a Mockingbird titled Go Set a Watchman. And many fans of the original book, the first book, were shocked to see Atticus Finch depicted as deeply racist in that book. But what we really see is a great writer shaped within 1950s structural racism, white supremacy culture, if you will, struggling to create a non-racist character. It took her 2 books to do it, and she never totally got it right. But the racial, she meant well, but the racial insensitivity in both books and the play is very real. But when I preached on that movie, I struggled to explain the racism because the vocabulary to even explain it had not yet been invented. Black film director Spike Lee later coined the term magical Negro for characters like Tom Robinson. They have no reality other than to build a story around the white heroes. And meanwhile, Atticus Finch is what's now called a white savior. The blacks in the story cannot help themselves, so a noble white person helps them. Now, magical Negroes and white saviors are now recognized as racist cliches. And that was part of what Columbus's black community were picking up on with East High School's play, but the vocabulary to even describe what was going on didn't yet exist. We're still figuring this stuff out. And so no wonder there was misunderstanding and hurt feelings on all sides. The writers and the high school all had the best intentions. Everybody did, but good intentions alone do not create justice or mutual respect. Blaming an innocent Tom Robinson for his own death is just one stark example. Or to put it differently, here's a thought experiment. What if the town's black citizens had contacted the NAACP for legal support for Tom Robinson? The novel is set in the mid-1930s, just when history's first black Supreme Court Justice, Thurgood Marshall, was just graduating from law school, starting out as a civil rights lawyer for the NAACP. So, what if a character based on Thurgood Marshall came to Alabama to be Tom Robinson's lawyer? Maybe with Atticus Finch as his assistant. You would definitely have a different story from the one Harper Lee wrote. The power dynamics would be totally different, but Harper Lee gives no sign she had even heard of Thurgood Marshall when she was writing that book. On the other hand, to give credit where credit was due, I have no doubt that Harper Lee was trying to write a truly anti-racist book. She did the very best she could, giving the understandings of white people in her day. And as for the movie, I suspect it was as anti-racist as it could be in 1962 and still draw an audience. Social justice is in part a learning process. I very much doubt that white audiences would ever have accepted the Thurgood Marshall character I just talked about, not in 1962. This is a very long, slow, learning as we go process. We've been at it for 200 years. We've got a long way to go yet. Fast forward to the Unitarian Universalist Association, spring of 2017. The UUA's Southern Region lead was retiring. The UUA personnel director interviewed several possible replacements, men, women, people of color, and he then hired a white male minister that he already knew, who did not even live in the Southern region and had no intention of relocating, and that was okay. And in so doing, he passed over women and people of color who did live in the Southern region. Now, I know the minister who got picked. We're pretty good friends, actually, and he would have done a great job. I know some of the other candidates as well, and several of them would also have done a great job. And in fact, one of the passed over applicants now does lead this UUA region. Witnesses have suggested to me their suspicion that the personnel director made his choice before he even began the interviews. And in personnel matters, that's not unusual, but it's problematic. Unitarian Universalist professionals of color had been talking about this problem for years. UUA executive hiring was weighted toward white men, particularly white male ministers. One blush. One applicant of color told again that a white male was just a better fit, quote, quote, went public in an outraged blog post. Again, you've probably heard most of this story. Meanwhile, at the same time, UU professionals of color had just gathered on retreat, and it would take an hour to recite all the details, and that's not necessary. Suffice to say, outrage exploded and then washed into social media. The personnel director, UUA president, and UUA vice president all resigned, along with other top-level leadership. The UUA has been working to figure out what went wrong and how to fix it ever since. Another fine growth experience, one might say. But here's the deal. There were good intentions on everyone's part, but good intent alone does not create mutual respect or justice. It just felt safer and easier for the white male personnel director to hire a white male minister he already knew and liked, rather than take a chance on a woman or person of color he didn't know as well. There were diversity goals in place, but that goal got put off just this one more time. And that is exactly how white supremacy culture works. Folks who look like me, just doing what seems easiest and most practical in the moment, again and again. And in this case, it blew up what we now realize was a badly flawed system. Now, for the record, I really appreciate the steps our UUA has been trying to take ever since. And part of this does include a hard look at our 7 principles. We've had them almost 40 years now, the 7 principles, and they are full of good intentions. But even before the 2017 hiring fiasco, people were starting to wonder whether the 7 principles by themselves were enough. Maybe we needed something more accountability, less theory. The hard part is finding consensus on what that something more ought to look like. One possibility is the proposed 8th principle. Also, 2 years ago, General Assembly, our national convention, voted to form a commission to study all of Article 2, which is the part of our UUA bylaws that states our purposes and principles. They submitted a total rewrite of Article 2, completely replacing the 7 principles with 7 values. There were a lot of feedback sessions, and they revised their draft, and actually that revision just dropped this past week, and there were some changes in it. Meanwhile, since 2017, there's also been hard pushback from a few folks against any real change. Being me, I had to jump into that conversation 2 years ago, and I wrote a whole book on how easy it is for a straight, white, relatively able male such as myself to misunderstand challenges faced by marginalized identities. I worked really hard on this book. The title is, I don't know if you can read it from there, the title is Clueless, that's a theological term, My Education in White Supremacy. Things like watching The Lone Ranger when I was 4 years old. I could go into details, but we don't have time. So I passed this book around for comment. White colleagues who read it mostly loved it, but colleagues of color didn't say very much. I finally just came out and asked, and I was told, well, Dennis, your good intentions are obvious, but you're still mainlining your own white male experience. You're telling us what marginalization means to an able straight white man. It doesn't speak to our actual lived experience at all. So, blush again, I had done really the same thing I criticized To Kill a Mockingbird for. So I'm now working on a whole different approach from an angle where my own viewpoint is less crucial. And I think this is really important work to be doing, but it's not easy. And one reason I'm telling this story is that there have been other times I've found myself making similar mistakes and been told about it. If we engage racial justice issues, gender justice, or issues around ableism with the people who live those issues every day, people like me are going to make mistakes. And I can tell you that when you work hard and sincerely try and still find out you've goofed, that can really sting. It's embarrassing. In the case of my book, Clueless, it really took the wind out of my sails. It took me a good year to figure out a different approach and get back into my writing stride. But I'm now going full bore and I'm still glad that in the end I believe I will write something a lot better because I got that feedback and I was able to make myself listen to it. I believe that courage, resilience, stick-to-itiveness, and the willingness to be uncomfortable, to make a mistake, to get disappointed, and then get up and get back after justice work, to me, those are important pieces of my liberal religious experience. It's really easy to say we believe something, or to say we don't believe something. We're really good at that. But I can tell you from my own experience, the most difficult thing of all may just be to put our own egos at risk, to actually listen to the lived experience and opinions of marginalized people we claim to want to help, to admit that people like me still have a lot to learn from people outside the dominant culture mainstream. For the record, that is where the 8th principle comes in. That's where the Article 2 rewrite comes in. Change is difficult, especially change to something we've come to take for granted, like our 7 principles, and really our approach to social justice for a generation after we approved the 7 principles. But here's an example of the way change works. When it was first published in 1611, the King James Bible was hated by most English Christians. The Puritans particularly detested it. They said it was sacrilegious. They wanted to keep their own translation called the Geneva Bible. 400 years later, of course, Christian conservatives now consider the King James the only Bible worth reading. And I've even talked to some folks who don't even know it's a translation. They think that's what the apostles actually wrote. I'm serious. Let's not do that with our 7 principles. Unitarian Universalists are a proudly non-creedal religious tradition. We have religious values. We make religious promises, covenants about how we want to relate to one another and to the world. That's basically what the 7 principles are. But from our beginnings, we have never, ever tried to set our ideals in stone because it really can't be done. We keep finding new ways to express them as we learn more about ourselves and about the world. And I often say, if we ever are afraid to change our 7 principles or revise them or replace them entirely, we start down that road, making them into a sacred creed. And I'm fine with sacred, but I'm a little nervous about creed. Our association's bylaws require that we revisit our principles and purposes regularly. For the record, there have been a few suggested changes over the years, but nothing major ever got voted in. And with this year's Article 2 rewrite, we don't even see the 7 principles or the 6 sources in their place. This draft has, again, 7 values, and if you want to bring up that visual, if you haven't seen it before, here it is in this visual: justice, equity, interdependence, generosity, pluralism, and transformation around the core value of love at the center. And even that's been tweaked a little after the feedback. Now, if you don't start and finish your day by checking what's going on behind the scenes at the Unitarian Universalist Association, you may still be catching up with all this. We've been talking about a proposed 8th principle. Now here's this draft that's totally different from what we have now, but it has actually been in the works for a couple of years. And I believe we need to approach this really as an evolving think piece and a deep conversation about our ideals and our mission. It is tempting to look at it and go, eek, what are they doing to our 7 principles? But if the 7 or 8 principles have deep meaning for us. They will not go away just because we rewrite our bylaws. That's why I did that 130-year-old affirmation as the introit. And again, that was never in anybody's bylaws to begin with, and we're still using it, and it's still evolving. Meanwhile, I just invite folks to look at this revision if you get time, think it over, and maybe get in on the discussion process if you have strong opinions on it. This latest version, again, is already changed from the first draft. There will be at least one more round of feedback, at least a mini assembly in May to further workshop it. And that's all before our next General Assembly in June gets a hold of it. In other words, what we're witnessing here is classic Unitarian Universalist democratic process. Now, I predict that the version that comes out of this General Assembly, if it does come out, will still be different from what we're seeing now. I wouldn't bet real big money on any predictable outcome. And whatever does come out of GA, another year will go by, and then it has to be passed by a 3/4 margin of delegates in 2024 to actually change what we have in the bylaws now. So I don't know what'll happen. I do think this process is a good thing. Our whole society, what we've learned about one another, has evolved a lot since the 1980s. How should we change with that? How can we be better? Maybe we will just pass a version of the 8th principle and drop the total rewrite. That's still a possibility. I believe what we're seeing here is liberal, religious, creative process at work. And when you fire up creativity on that scale, there is no predicting where it will lead. This process is about invitation and stimulation. There is still no certain destination. 150 years ago, someone asked legendary Unitarian minister Thomas Starr King where his church stood on an important issue of that day, and he replied, Reverend King, he responded, "We don't stand, we move." 150 years later, yeah, we're still moving. Or for a better word, we're still evolving. Come evolve with us. I feel a little excited, a little nervous, and definitely curious about how we evolve next. I hope you do too. Amen. May it be so. Speaking of evolution, one of my favorite hymns ever, ooh, I don't want that. One of my favorite hymns ever was number 121, quote, quote, "We'll build a land." And then it came into some reevaluation due to various concerns I don't need to go into. So we're going to do an evolved version of that. I've forgotten the title, but I think it's "We'll Build a Promise" or something like that. Number 121, pardon? Come build a dream. There we go. I wrote it. That doesn't mean I remember it. So I invite you to stand as you're so inclined, willing, and able, and join in singing number 121, but it'll be on the screen. We'll build a dream. We have a responsive reading to in lieu of benediction. That's assuming I can find it here. Uh-oh, there we go. Sacred discomfort. And I invite you, I'll read the straight type, and I invite you to respond with the boldface type. Excuse me. We are a strong and justice-seeking people. We aspire to a better world where neighbors are beloved and the same roads lie open to all. Therefore, choose easy path. We yearn after justice and compassion. We test old hierarchies that place one set of human qualities above another. Even in such aspiration, though, we understand that this is work which will prove neither easy nor comfortable. Old habits of mind create tomorrows which look exactly like yesterday's. That is precisely what makes old habits comfortable. It therefore follows that where yesterday leaves something to be desired, today must change. We understand the challenges, new paths lead through shadows, unfamiliar ground, new vibrations, new practices, bring feelings of discomfort, even risk. Old set ways lead down a road that's paved and smooth. Familiar patterns which we know by heart are easily followed with our eyes closed. But we resolve to open our eyes. We resolve to live in courage, change old ways, and do what has not yet been done. Let us sing the praises of sacred discomfort then, because that is the door by which we enter a new and better realm.
And now we will extinguish our chalice by repeating the words on the screen. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Congregational meeting, which was scheduled for today after the service, will be rescheduled due to weather. So check your email for those details. Go now in peace. Have a great day.